I don't know if you were here at the opening, but I mentioned quickly at the opening that I met Susan at U of T. Susan was one of my professors where I did my master's. And so we had a bit of a relationship there for a couple of years, and it wasn't really until after I finished the program that we kept in touch and got interested in her work as a professional artist. She had an exhibition in Toronto that included a couple of the pieces actually that are going to be at Stratford, and Cluster was also at that exhibition. And I just kind of, was really taken by them and thought about them often when I thought about the kind of projects that I would like to curate separate from YYZ. If you don't know, YYZ is an artist-run center, and we don't really focus on curatorial projects or curatorial work. So I am the director, but it's really artist-based. So for my own personal practice, really I have to look at other institutions to fulfill that sort of role in my personal life. So, which is when I talked to Susan if she wanted to collaborate on an exhibition, thinking that she was working on a new video work that had never been exhibited, and that perhaps there was a possibility to show that third video as part of this video trilogy. So that's how the project started, which it has grown from that in the sense that, well, you can see it's not just 3 videos. And actually the second video is not, the last video is not ready actually. She's still working on it, but we can talk about it a little bit more. So overall, looking at her practice and the first exhibition on her CV is in 1978. I don't know if you missed some before that, but that's the official date.
How many people were born then? It's getting a little scary now, I have to tell you.
And then looking at this, very comprehensive body of work, and the fact that she had finished teaching at U of T, she had recently retired, and there was this new stage in her life, that it was a good opportunity for us to talk about a kind of retrospective of her work, but one that is really focused on her agency as a practicing working artist, not just a simple looking back without really some, presence of really still thinking about the future at the same time. So in looking at her work, I noticed that there was a thread of focusing on this manufactured landscape and her relationship with water in different forms, and that relationship had been present in her work from the 70s up to now, up until the work that she's still thinking about of creating, in the near future. And that thread was also part of this multidisciplinary practice that didn't just focus on a type of medium or a type of approach or process, but it actually seemed quite expansive and trying different things at different times for a specific purpose, not just through her studio work, but also she's done quite a number of public works. So even through that, I think that theme or thread of human relationship to water and the human experience as an spectator, and perhaps being quite a bit of a removed of that natural world, that also kind of was part of the public work. So that's where I came in, and we had a conversation, and the first thing she said is like, "Why do you want to work with her?" So this is what I said.
That's true, actually, that is the first thing I said, really?
But certainly, you know, having had a relationship, a mentorship, student relationship, kind of established a sense of trust. She knew a little bit about my character, temperament, and she knew that I was coming into this project really trying to just highlight her work, her practice, her trajectory, and that I was simply, you know, trying to help it move along. So here we are. We can talk about how you started in the 70s, a little bit about your background.
Okay, a little bit. I actually, when I think back on it, it seems like so long ago, but I actually started off by going to Sheridan, and I studied a lot of textile design, furniture design, a little bit of architecture, ceramics, that kind of thing, which is a very physical, hands-on process when I first started getting seriously into going to school and all that kind of thing. And what happened in my third or fourth year is that I started to work much more sculpturally. So I started doing odd things that you kind of do in school, you know, to emphasize this, because you do certain things in school that you don't do later on. And I was doing series like backyards with these weird sort of what I would call kitschy objects, but they were all to do with nature and the idea of culture. And that goes back a long time. And in fact, I really haven't changed that much in my sensibility towards nature and culture, that juxtaposition. So in the 70s, when I graduated from Sheridan, I went right into working at Harbourfront, and was part of a group of people that ran the Harbourfront Art Gallery before it became the power plant. And at that time, I ran the craft studio, and I curated exhibitions, and I installed exhibitions in the bigger gallery. And I did that for 2 years with someone who was probably the most difficult person that you could ever imagine to work with. And her name was Anita Ahrens. And this is one of those situations that when you work with someone like that, you get calls at 2 in the morning, and at 3 in the morning, and at 4 in the morning. So I had no life for 2 years. And that was fine, you know. I was in my mid-20s, and I thought, okay, that's cool. I can suck this up. I can do it. But it also allowed me to meet a lot of people. And we would put exhibitions on that had 200 sculptors in it. And we'd take up the whole of the waterfront that had these sort of empty warehouse buildings. And we did these massive shows, of which there's very little evidence of 40 years ago, but now that's sort of how things got started. So it wasn't as if I'd gone to OCAD and I had this sort of select group of people that sort of moved along like a lot of people do. I was completely sort of on the outside. And in retrospect, being on the outside as an artist allowed me to do a lot of things that I could experiment with than if I was sort of part of a group that did a certain kind of work. At least that's my take on it. So I started working more and more in the studio, and I moved in with an artist named Mark Gomes, who's a sculptor who went to Fanshawe College in London. And we started kind of working together. At that time, he was showing at a gallery in Toronto called the Isaacs Gallery. And he was doing very large scale, very physical pieces of work. And I was still working very small. And we started to, over the years, collaborate with each other on public work and all sorts of things. But my own particular practice sort of slowly developed. And when I left Harbourfront and decided to work in a studio on my own, I made a conscious decision to do that because I had to figure out what I was all about. And the things that I thought of in my 20s are still things that I pursue now, but I'm much smarter. I'm smarter, I've read a lot more, and I've been out there for a long time. So it has allowed me to sort of take certain kind of risks that I like to take and develop certain skills with the collaborative aspect of someone else. So when I do video works, I work with someone who's an animator, or if I do a public work that's on my own, I work with the fabricators and all that kind of thing. So I would not call myself an artist that has to be kind of head down in the studio alone all the time. I don't do that. It kind of makes me crazy. I don't want to be that isolated. So I consciously work on things where I know that there'll be a bigger picture and I'll learn more information. So for instance, when I was doing, this is part of a trilogy, when I was doing this piece, I worked with an animator who works for the film industry, and we developed a relationship over about 7 or 8 years. And I would talk to him about what I was trying to do, and he'd give me information, and we'd sort of go back and forth. I wouldn't say that he was a classic collaborator, but he certainly gave me an insight into something I didn't know anything about. And I think the most consistent thing about my production is the fact that I actually like to take on something that I don't know anything about, because I actually learn something. I don't want to repeat myself all the time. I want to learn something that's kind of beyond what my knowledge base is. And then I learn stuff, and that helps me move to the next thing. So right now, I'm working on a piece of work with a very well-known lab called Thing to Think, that's part of Ryerson University, and I'm working with a fellow named David Dieter who's doing these three-dimensional models. So I'm working with him on this kind of odd object, and we are having a lot of dialogue back and forth, and because I don't know anything about it, I think this is great, you know? After making art for all this time, it's great, you know, I'm just so excited about it. And that's sort of, in a way, what keeps me going. You know, I really, really, really do not want to be bored by my practice. I know that sounds kind of odd, but I still want to feel like I'm always forward-looking in what I'm doing. So when Anna, we had this discussion about this show, in a way, and you'll probably be surprised by this, but you know that there is a consistent thread in what you do, but it's never sort of very evident until you start putting things together, and suddenly you go, oh my God, you know, I've been doing this for a long time. Because despite that there are 8 works in here, the first water piece I ever did was on the pond at Harbourfront in 1978-79. And it was a piece made out of rebar and concrete. The pond now at Harbourfront, if any of you have ever been to Toronto, is now a skating rink. But at that time, I did this first waterwork. And then I'd done weird waterworks in Georgian Bay that you sort of make and you abandon and you leave them there and you don't care. I did a show in Winnipeg at what then was called the Winnipeg Perspective in 1980, and it were these concrete sluices that ran under the baseboard all through the galleries, all filled with water. So it comes up all the time, but it isn't like I'm sitting down with a sketchbook saying, well, my next piece is about water and this is going to be about water. It's not like that at all. Because I think in any artist's practice, you move in and out of things. So I've done large photographic works that have massive amounts of objects in them that don't necessarily relate to water, but the overall picture from beginning to now has had water as this continuous thread running through it. But like any artist, you sort of say, oh, this is an interesting idea, I'm going to do this, or this is an interesting idea, I'm going to do that. But I'm not an artist that you say, oh, well, she shifted just slightly. You know, she's now using blue instead of red. I'm not that kind of artist at all. Because personally, I want to be excited by my own practice. Not that people who do that aren't excited, but I seem to have a kind of restlessness about what I do. So I'm always willing to take on something else all the time.
There's actually an exhibition opening up at the Art Gallery of Hamilton that has 2 of your works. 2
of my works in it. It opens on the 9th, I think. And there are 2 works. One is called Setting, which is, it's kind of awkward and giant. I don't know. When I look at it now, I think, how on earth did I do that? Because I think sometimes as an artist, you look back on things and you go, how did I do that? I mean, it's like public work. I don't have a clue sometimes how I've done things, but you just do it. Setting is a big plate piece based on an eye chart, and it's about 14 feet high. And the other piece is called Comfort, which is a table with all these cast couches that sit underneath it, which is sort of this kind of, what would I call it, this sort of domestic series of works that I did. Because I'm very interested in books like Poetics of Space, books that sort of deal with interiors and architecture and all that kind of thing always plays a big part in what I'm doing. So I was saying to someone earlier that when I go into a gallery like this gallery, it isn't a neutral space for me at all. It gives me something back that tells me how I should install works in here, or what's going to happen, and how the narrative is going to occur between each individual work. So I always have told my students that no space is neutral. Even if it's a big white room, it's not neutral. It never is. Because there are all sorts of other things that play around it that affect what you're doing.
You were mentioning architecture a couple of times, and I know you've talked about your family having a link to architecture, like there's architects in your family.
Lot.
DNA. That the architecture and how it plays into the video trilogy and even the work like the aqueduct and the cluster.
It does. I think, but partly the architectural part of it is sort of creating an environment. I don't think literally in the sense of designing like an architect. I'm not really interested in that so much, but I'm interested in interrupting the space a bit. So with this particular piece in this room, it interrupts the space because it creates a kind of optical illusion here with the flood work. Which I like. So it's kind of push-pull. You change it, like painting a block of color on a wall kind of pulls it into a different place rather than sort of doing this around on a wall. You know, I really want to have something shift in some way. I think, for a lot of galleries, they kind of have to, suck it up when someone comes in and decides to paint all the walls a different color. It's kind of a leap of faith, okay, with some galleries to do that. But I think as to why I do that, I was just talking to a friend of mine earlier, and there's a very formal nature to my work, which is something that is my essential nature. And it's always been there. So I can't suddenly become something I'm not, even though, to contradict myself, the work I'm most interested in when I look at is work that has this kind of weird element of failure in it, because it actually is the most seductive for me. But I don't do that, you know. Not that there isn't an element of failure in everything you do. I mean, really, you know, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But that's what I'm the most attracted to. So I think in the back of my mind, I think about that a lot, even though when I finally gone through the process and I'm working on an exhibition or I'm putting 2 or 3 works together, because now I'm not as prolific as I used to be, it always ends up in a certain way that I seem to, in my brain, have no control over. Does that make sense?
So the first video in the series was
Snow.
Snow, and it's a courtyard. That's the same architect, right?
Yeah.
We'll talk a little about the architect.
Yeah, about 6, 7, 8 years ago, I was in London, in the UK. And I went to the Design Museum, which has since moved, and they had a huge exhibition of maquettes by an architect named Chipperfield. And I started photographing the interior of all these maquettes because they were really provocative. And he's a very famous architect and designed the new museum in Berlin. He's a very famous guy. But he had this kind of weird, like you'll see here, this weird kind of historical pushed up against contemporary, which I always kind of like. And when you see a lot of historical architecture, especially in Europe, because, you know, in Canada, they seem to tear down buildings and only leave the front part of them and do everything behind them, which is contemporary. So I started photographing them, and I spent a lot of time with these photographs and decided that I wanted to create a bit of a spectacle, slightly catastrophic in these videos. So the first one is really an atrium space, and it's a two-dimensional photograph. It's one of my photographs that I have animated with a blizzard. So this atrium space has this kind of open air quality to it, and this event, this 2-minute event, is swirling around the columns and everything inside this environment, which is really a photograph. But it's been pushed into a different kind of reality. So this one is a similar thing. It's a two-dimensional photograph that's been animated with water. And water is one of the hardest things you can possibly do when you're animating. It's the most difficult because it doesn't cooperate, right? It can look really, it can look so bad. So he and I worked really hard on it. I have to say it took 2.5 years of working really hard on this together to try and make it look real, but not real. So you're not saying, well, of course the water's doing that in that video. You know it's not, but you're kind of pretending that it's happening in this video. And the third one, which I haven't shown yet, which is called Fog, is in this kind of almost Byzantine corridor with these columns and this whirl of fog. Fog, almost like smoke, but it's fog, is creating this chaos in this very forced perspective tunnel of a hallway. And so they become these kind of environmental things that sort of maybe talks about where we are, but maybe not. Because I'm going to be the first person to say that this, you know, I'm not talking about the fact that we're losing water or people don't have water. It's really not that. It's just a part of what I see, you know, out there, that I see this and I think it's worth documenting, and it's about nature and how it pushes up against us and we have no control. Like the water spouts on the wall behind you, we have no control over that. And if anybody has been looked at Lake Ontario in September, you can see water spouts. You can see them on Lake Huron, and they are unbelievable things to see. Things that we have no control over. That I like a lot. So I think that my practice sort of becomes a practice of observing all the time. You know, you can't make work unless you're looking all the time. You have to look. You have to see what's out there. And I don't think we should bury ourselves in books on art theory all the time, even though I taught that when I was at school with my students. I think that we should just ease ourselves back a bit and be observant in a different way. Because I would not say that these are political things that I'm doing. I think they are observations. Maybe that makes sense or maybe not, I don't know.
You talked about Seascape, and Seascape and Aqueduct were part of an exhibition at the power plant. Can you talk a little bit about
Yeah,
that?
well, this was part of a big exhibition I had at the power plant in the mid-90s. It was on the south wall, well, it's not the same position, but it was on the south wall of the gallery at the power plant. I don't know how many have been to the power plant. This was actually done in '83 in an exhibition that had 4 other parts to it. Just to give you a little background, I think as artists, when you've had a 40-year practice or something shockingly long, that you start to edit your own work. And every 10 years, I edit my storage unit. And I hold the things that mean something to me, and the other stuff I can leave. Because in that whole process, I've made lots of mistakes. So the aqueduct comes from this installation I did at the Harborfront Art Gallery before it became the power plant, and it had 4 parts to it. It had a megaphone that was supported by books, and it had the aqueduct, and then it had this huge drawing on the wall on big sheets of, I think it was plywood, if I remember correctly. I don't have those anymore. Just a massive thing that I decided to do. I don't know whatever. This stayed with me because I think it's kind of an extraordinary object. That's an emotional decision to keep it. And a year or two ago, Mark Gomes, who is my partner, we had a show together and at Katzmann Gallery in Toronto. And I decided I wanted to, and I've done it before, to pull some works from the past to move them into the present to see where they sat with the rest of my work. And so now I think this is the second time I've shown these 2 pieces together because they work. And that's a surprise to me. Totally. So.
The other work that I wanted to talk about was Ledgers.
Oh, yeah. Ledgers is Anna's favorite.
It's my favorite.
This is very personal. So, and I try not to bring certain things in, but if they kind of sit with me for a long period of time, then I think, well, I guess it's the right thing to do. The ledgers, the books themselves, are actually belong to my father. And my father was kind of a compulsive character. And he documented the weather from 1968 until the day he died. And that's what's in those ledgers. And I always thought it was very interesting, you know, we look at our families and we sort of, you know, pick up the pieces of our upbringing, especially as you get older. It was so indicative of his personality, these ledgers, these 2 volumes, because he would write them painstakingly every day, about the same time, you know, towards the end of the day. And the last 25 years of it were in Victoria, because they lived on the West Coast, and my father was born there. And so they moved there when they got older, and like, you know, everybody in Canada wants to move to the West Coast because, I don't know, I always call it God's waiting room, actually, because they're all out there. And he would document it, but a little bit on the side, over on the far edge, somewhere here, it would say, Mark and Susan came to visit. Like we were way over here somewhere, you know, meanwhile, like, you know, the wind velocity is this and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. And after he died and those books were kind of lying around, and I'm always surprised my brother didn't grab them because he had a tendency to do that before I could get in there. I've tried to work them into work, and I've done photographic works with them in, but this is the first time that I sort of settled, okay? This is it. So in this particular exhibition, what strikes me is I've got these ledgers and they're on this very formal table, but the balls, the glass balls, which are like reflective balls that you can move around if you want, they say not to do it, but you can, is so much like the water that's dripping off the lens of this fictitious survey camera that's in this piece. So this kind of dialogue between that and this, to me, is very clearly evident, but it will take you a while to figure that out, because you can see the drops that they hit this fictitious lens that's on the outside of this, right? Which I call surveillance camera. And it's dripping on the lens, and that is reflective of that. So there's a nice sort of thing going on between these 2 pieces, which is why I wanted them opposite each other. So the books are kind of important for me, of all the things that you end up by having after your parents, because both my parents are dead. That's sort of, you know, kind of there for me to do with my father, not my mother. My mother was a painter, so I got lots of stuff from my mother.
And actually, one of the pages on the books is open to Cortez.
Yeah,
Which you had a home in Cortez. For
yeah, we had a place on Cortez Island, one of the northern Gulf Islands, for a long time, for 20 years, and we sold it 2 years ago and did what everybody doesn't do and moved back to Ontario. We would go there in the summer and we went, oh, no, I don't think we want to be out there, I think we want to be here. So, you know, in southern Ontario with horrible winters and everything else, we've gone the opposite of everybody. So, yeah, we spend a lot of time on Cortez, which is pretty interesting. And that's where artists like Liz Magor or Esther Gerritz, who's a very well-known artist. There were quite a few artists on the island. But I think we decided, I don't think so.
And the work at the entrance was shot in BC.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, they were shot in BC. And that's animated too. The burning house was animated. It's the first time I did any animation. And I worked with one of my ex-students on that, actually, who is now a hotshot artist. Looks good. So any questions? Can I do that?
Yeah, yeah.
Any questions from you guys? Oh, come on. Yeah.
You said that there's works that you explore in art school that you don't after the art school, and things that you do versus you don't do in your own practice versus when you're in education. What kind of things?
Say that again? Okay, did I say that?
Yeah.
That doesn't,
You
really.
said that,
You should correct me.
that there's things that you do in school that you don't do later on.
Yeah, I think that's true. Because I think in school, you've got a lot of pressure on you, you know, to produce a certain kind of thing. And when I was in school, I was doing really fine art and not what I was going to school for, you know, because I kind of did it and I think, oh, this doesn't challenge me mentally very much. I know that sounds pretty pretentious, but in fact, that's the way I thought of it, you know. And there was a different kind of encouragement then. You know, when I was teaching at U of T, and I would teach both graduate students and undergrads, I always used to say to them, and it's a lesson, I still believe it, is that it's the time to do things that you would never do. You know, to experiment, to push yourself to another place. Because when you get out of school, oh, the pressures are horrific. You know, you have to, I don't know if you're going to be an artist or whatever you end up by being, you've got a lot more pressure on you to produce something else rather than having the ability to play. Because I always think that when you make work, you're allowing yourself to play. And there was, do you know William Kentridge's work at all? Anybody here know his work? You know, he's just an amazing artist. Like, he's in his mid-50s. He does these fantastic political films. He's got a great sense of humor. And he gave a lecture at U of T, I don't know, Lisa, what, 5 years ago, 6 years ago? To Die For. This lecture, I was just like, you know, because I had liked his work a lot, but I had never seen him in his performing thing. And he talked about the element of play. He talked about it all the time, how it's so important to allow yourself to play. And I think that's true. So I used to tell my students to try and play when they're in school, but the projects you're giving your students, you have to mark them, you have to do all these things, so it starts to narrow all the time when you're in school. So when you get out and you feel like you can afford to, and of course I have to say, to put it in perspective, and you're all going to hate this, is I'm kind of a child of the Canada Council. You know, when I got out of school, I was part of a generation that was very heavily supported by Canada Council grants or Ontario Arts Council grants or Art Bank or whatever it was, because I am of a certain age now. And I firmly, firmly believe this. It allowed me to be the artist I am today. Because it supported me, and I did juries, and I did all that kind of thing, but it gave me a little bit of money that I could do stuff that nowadays, and I am completely sympathetic with students now and artists now, it's just not there in the same way. So you're juggling everything, right? You're juggling everything. So as I got older, I realized that there are a lot of people who want grants the same as me. I'm not going to always, what we used to call jokingly, go back to the trough all the time to the government to support me as an artist. And that's why I started doing public work. And that's why I ended up by teaching, because I was asked to teach at U of T by someone who was starting a new department. And it was just like luck, really. And the teaching did me so much good to teach, because then you're constantly thinking about not only what you're projecting to your students, but also what your practice is about. So you're doing this push-pull all the time. And if you're lucky enough to be in a position where you can still make work on a regular basis when you're teaching, which I was lucky enough to do that, and I had fabulous colleagues that I was working with, some of them are here today, just the best. So the dialogue was really, really interesting when we were all showing work, and you know, it was great. And I never say I retire, I said I quit. Artists never retire, we don't do that. Not good, not good. Does that answer your question or no? I hope so, because sometimes I can kind of overspeak or do something weird. And I tend to be very physical when I talk. Yeah, Kim.
Yeah, you mentioned something about failure being important to you. Do you hide the failures so much? Because your work is so impeccably.
I know, it's kind of compulsive. I always go back to him, because he was compulsive. I got that from my father. It's his fault. Oh, you know, there are tons of failures.
Well, you don't show them.
No, what my failures.
We
edit.
discover them later?
Well, I think that you look at your body of work, and since we're in a country that really doesn't, you know, people don't buy a lot of work here, right? You either donate or you give them to your friends. You kind of look at them and you go, oh, I don't think that's very interesting now, or I don't like that at all. You know, I think that you do that automatically. And maybe somebody else should make the decision about what I get rid of. I don't know, but I think that you kind of have to shift things over. You can't keep carrying this with you. And then, of course, we all go to some other place in a certain number of years, and somebody's stuck with all this work. What do you do with it? So I'm trying to be kind. Trying to be kind. Does that make sense? Oh, yeah.
Stuff we never talk about.
What do I eat for dinner? No, I'm only kidding.
There's a certain kind of literalness
Yeah, I know.
in your work. And I find it very bold, like it's very, you know, more shot than that.
Oh, to let it out?
Yeah, can you just speak about like how you approach
Being candid?
literalness?
How do I approach being literal? I don't even know if I can answer that. I think it's, I think it's actually kind of my personality. I mean, I know I do, because I think I do get into trouble for it, because I kind of say what I think. I'm a little better at it now that I'm older than I used to be. I mean, I've been pretty cut and dry about things, my likes and dislikes. It's hard for me to answer that, because I don't set out to be literal. I think it just kind of, there it is. And maybe in how it's presented, it brings in those two words that no one ever likes to talk about, that have become taboo, or certainly were taboo in the 80s and 90s, which is the idea of beauty and the sublime, which are not very trendy to talk about, but I don't care. So in that sense, when I'm looking at something, or, I'll give you an example. I've been doing these very literal 1-minute videos with my iPhone, which are based on places I've been. If I've decided I get lucky and I can go somewhere where there's a bubbling volcano, which I have gone to, I do these 1-minute videos, which are totally literal, right? Or totally literal about a rainfall. But there's something that shifts slightly for me, and I don't know how to explain it when I do these. That takes it away from being just simply a document of something that's raining. It becomes something else. I don't know if it's to do with how the camera is held, or if I'm trying to convince myself that it's something different. I don't know yet. I have no idea. I mean, we all can convince ourselves that we're doing something different than we are. But for me, Kim, where are you? Kim, you're sort of lost in the crowd there. The literalness has a kind of direct honesty. And I personally like that. That's all I can say about that, really.
For me, it allows, I think, as a viewer, it allows us to go past the interpretation, past, stage.
I would hope so, yeah.
And then takes us somewhere else.
And that is ideal.
It's so literal, yet it's not at all.
Yeah, I think ideally that's what I would like it to be, but I'm not setting out to do that. I think that comes with everybody's practice. I think that we all try to take it somewhere else, and sometimes you get really successful. You know, as an artist, when you've taken it somewhere else, you know it's right there. It's this intense feeling, and I think probably in the 40 years or whatever it is that I've been making work, it doesn't happen all the time that you suddenly say, oh my God, I got that. You know, it's such a great feeling, but it's so rare, really. And because, and I will underline this, and this is not casting aspersions on somebody who does this, but I am not remotely, I don't make product to sell. I'm not interested in that. I just make work. So I'm not saying that I have to make work because I mean, it's a problem when you want to have a dealer because they want to sell work, and I'm not interested, really, I'm not interested. But I have sold 2 of these videos to private people, and they have them in their living room, and they're going all the time, and that is so cool to see. That's just like great. So I think because I don't think about that, it allows me to go somewhere else. Does that make sense to you? It just allows me to move forward because I just don't think about it. It seems like a non-issue. And I've never thought about it, actually. Even though I have works in collections, I'm always surprised anybody's interested anyway.
Yeah, I would say that maybe one of the reasons why the relationship between us works well is because you don't like that pretentiousness. You're very honest, and that translates to the work. And,
Maybe.
I'm personally not interested in the same thing.
Yeah, I think that. I think sometimes you find somebody who understands that. I mean, when you're part of the art world, which I am to a certain extent, slightly removed now, I kind of moved over a little bit because I don't want to get a cold. So I'm not going to openings. That's being just a little compulsive, I know. I think sometimes you find someone who shares a similar thing with you, who understands what you're doing. And so you have a kind of symbiotic relationship, you know, that someone gets it. And then you say, okay, this is good, I can have a conversation with that person. Because not everybody gets it. You know, there are a lot of people who wouldn't be interested in this at all. And I can live with that. It's really kind of not my problem. I don't really care. I'm not out to make work so that everybody loves it. You know, I mean, that's something I have to tell you. When I started doing public work, and I've done a lot, done 5 on my own and 5 collaborative with the person I live with. And they're very hard to do. They take 2 or 3 years, and you're juggling unions and architects and designers, and oh my God, it just goes on and on forever. And the last big piece we did was at Pearson in the new terminal. It's in the arrivals level when you come out of, I don't know, going to Italy or wherever you're going internationally, Buffalo. And you walk right through it, right through it. It's on the ceiling and the floor. And of all the times that we have done collaborative works together, Mark and I, he this time, because we were working with such great people, we worked with Moshe Safdie, we worked with a woman from San Francisco who is an art consultant who actually went to exhibitions. Most of them don't. So they knew all about Documenta, and they knew about Venice Biennale, and we'd have these great conversations around a table with these artists that were engaged in putting work into the airport, and we got very spoiled. And that was the last piece we did, because we were working with the Steelworkers Union, and I don't know, the Terrazzo Union, and you name it. It was just, and we kind of got to the point where we thought, I can't do this anymore. You know, I can't constantly be justifying my existence as an artist by saying I want to do this and I want to do that, and why can't I do this, and no, you should do that. You know, it just makes you crazy after a while. So in that process, I learned a lot about what I want to do and what I don't want to do. I have no regrets about doing public work, because your audience is entirely different from the audience that goes to a gallery, and we all know that. And it's much more controversial when you do public art, because everybody has an opinion. Everybody, they hate it, they think it's awful, why'd you do that, it's really ugly, yada, 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 and your skin gets thicker and thicker and thicker, you know, as you kind of justify who you are. But I learned a lot from that. So I kind of put it this way. When I was still doing a lot of exhibitions at the same time I was doing public work, but when you kind of load yourself up with all that stuff, then when you decide to unload your stuff, it's kind of like opening a door and you walk through it and you say, this is great. I don't have to do this anymore. So anyway, we stopped doing it in about 2004 or 5, maybe somewhere in there.
And you don't think you'll do it again?
Don't know.
Depends if the right team.
Well, if it's an interesting, if it comes up and it's challenging, and maybe it allows us to be playful or do whatever, I think that, I don't know, I think public art has to have a sense of humor. So if it allows us to do that, great. But I was part of, you know, we were part of a group that did site-specific things. Some of them are built into buildings, like the piece at York University is built into the building, so they can't take it out of there unless they destroy the building. Or we've inlaid floors, which I've done 2 or 3 times, stuff like that. They're sort of always there. And you watch, some get deaccessions, some don't. We have a piece in Hamilton here that, I don't know, Igor probably, it's still there, isn't it, Igor? It's a frieze that used to be in the, what was that called? The shopping mall, what was that called?
It was Eaton Center.
Eaton Center. There's a big frieze done in bronze of these frantic running figures that say laws of nature, laws of the land, or something like that, or nature, culture, or something. We did that a long time ago, in '93, I think. And it may get deaccessioned. Do you know what that means, deaccessioning? It means they take it out of there. And they ask if anybody wants it. And I've always said, melt it down, we'll take a trip. You know? Why not? What's it worth? And the only thing I'll bring up about public art, one last thing, because I know you have to go, is that I did this huge fountain between the CN Tower and the Sky Dome at that time. In 1989 I got it, so I was much younger than I am now. And it's become a kind of landmark, which I had no idea. I mean, I just did it, you know, and it's called Salmon Run. So it's cheeky. I always say it's all about sex, because it's about spawning and all that kind of thing. And it has gone through, I could write a book on that particular commission, because it's been restored. It's now in its 3rd restoration, where they finally fixed it up and they're redoing the planting and all that kind of stuff. And the last meeting I had with them, because they always call me, and they say, okay, Susan, you've got to come in, I've got to go down there. And I say, well, you should do this, and we have to pick the tiles again, and you don't want it to turn into a giant urinal with everybody coming out of the Sky Dome and peeing in it, and oh my God, it just goes on forever. So the last time we had this meeting, I said, okay, things are getting serious now. I said, do not come to me about that fountain when I'm 80. Because I don't care what you do with it. You know, dig a hole and bury it. Just don't keep coming to me. And I sort of muse about, because it's made out of silicon bronze, and it's pretty amazing object. And I keep musing, like, oh, you know, we could melt the fish down and we could take a trip somewhere, it'd be great. And I wouldn't have to think about it anymore. But the city of Toronto wants to keep that thing going to the bitter end. So that's my experience with what you do with public art. And there's always a battle, always a battle, always a battle, all the time. And they sort of need repair and nobody does anything with it. And anyway, that's not to say you shouldn't do it, but anybody who's done it knows what it's about. And I'm sure some of you have to go to class now.
If you have one last question before you have to take off. This exhibition's gonna travel to Stratford. It'll open in May. Not everything that's here will travel, and some other pieces will be added. And we're still looking to have a third venue for the exhibition. And we're working on a catalog as well, so that will probably take about a year or so. But
Catalog, yes.
yeah, just keep in touch. And if you happen to be in Stratford or want to take a trip down, May, June, July, the exhibition will be up there at Gallery Stratford.
It's pretty there. And it's 2 galleries.
Yeah, 2 rooms, so.
So there'll be 4 extra works, I think, or something like that.
Yeah.
A few more things. Add to it. I think Paul, is Paul here, Paul? Yeah, he's kind of being, I'm going to work with Paul, apparently.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming, Paul.
Well, thank you so much for coming.
Yes, I hope that was enough. Okay.